From the SNC World Headquarters in New York, I'm Haley Bianco, and here are the stories we're following at this hour. In-person early voting kicked off today across battleground Wisconsin, with former President Barack Obama and Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz hosting a rally in Madison, and Republicans holding events to encourage casting a ballot for Donald Trump before Election Day. Trump lost Wisconsin by just under 21,000 votes in 2020. Trump and Kamala Harris are expecting another razor-thin margin in Wisconsin, and both sides are pushing voters to cast their ballots early. The period for early voting in Wisconsin that begins today runs through Sunday, November 3rd. Ballots began being sent by mail in late September, but beginning today, voters can request one at designated voting locations and cast their ballot in person. As of Friday, more than 305,000 absentee ballots had already been returned in Wisconsin. Voters can continue to return them by mail, in person, or at absentee ballot drop boxes. All absentee ballots must be received by the time polls close at 8 p.m. on Election Day. Battleground, Pennsylvania happens to have one of the fastest growing Hispanic communities in the country. Pennsylvania's Latino eligible voter population has more than doubled since 2000, from 208,000 to 579,000. That's according to the Latino Data Hub from the University of California. The population in cities like Allentown and Reading is now more than half Hispanic, with the majority being of Puerto Rican descent and a sizable portion of Dominican origin. In Pennsylvania, roughly half of all requested mail and absentee ballots had been cast by Monday. Of those, 63% had been returned by Democrats, with about 27% returned by Republicans. Trump lost Pennsylvania to Democrat Joe Biden in 2020. Nationwide, about 6 in 10 Hispanic voters supported Biden in 2020. In a push to get Democrats to the polls, former First Lady Michelle Obama is working with a voter mobilization group called When We All Vote, which has teamed up with drag queen group Drag Out the Vote to encourage the LGBTQ+ community to vote for Harris. More Republicans are casting their ballots early compared to 4 years ago, although Democrats still hold the edge in early voting turnout. With Election Day still 2 weeks away, over 15 million Americans have already voted by mail or at in-person early voting stations. Ira Spitzer reports.
In the states where voters register by party, Democrats have cast about 47% of the votes so far, compared to around 33% by Republicans. That's a much smaller margin than 4 years ago, when Democrat early voters outnumbered Republicans by more than 2-1 amid the COVID-19 pandemic and then-President Donald Trump's unsubstantiated allegations that the mail-in process was rife with fraud. However, Trump has changed his stance this time around, encouraging supporters to vote early. The 15 million early votes represent about 70% of the total number of eligible voters. It's a figure that's expected to continue to rise significantly in the coming days as the candidates make their final pitches to voters.
Americans hoping to leave an inheritance to their children would face a major blow if Kamala Harris is elected president. Bob Agnew explains.
Vice President Harris says she'll let a Trump tax exemption expire next year. That means the estate tax would kick in at a lower level, $5 million, and impact a greater number of families. The tax is especially hard on those families who own businesses, ranches, or farms. In those cases, the asset may have great value on paper, but not generate large cash flow. In many cases, such assets would have to be sold off just so the descendants could afford to pay the IRS the dreaded death tax. Bob Agnew reporting.
Polls are showing that Vice President Kamala Harris holds a narrow lead over former President Donald Trump. With 2 weeks until Election Day, these results reiterate how tight the race is as the candidates make a final push through important battleground states. Mitch McCann reports.
The Reuters poll found that Kamala Harris holds a 46 to 43 percentage point lead over Donald Trump nationally, a result that is within the margin of error. The survey also asked voters about the state of the economy, with 70% of respondents saying the cost of living was on the wrong track, while 60% said the economy was heading in the wrong direction. While Harris might be in the lead nationally in this poll, presidential elections are often decided by a handful of states. But in those polls too, the candidates can barely be separated. Donald Trump is set to hold a discussion with Latino leaders on Tuesday local time, as well as an event with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris will sit for an interview with NBC Nightly News. In New York, Mitch McCann, Salem News Channel.
More than 20 heads of states are in Russia today for a summit in what the Kremlin has called one of the largest-scale foreign policy events ever in Russia. Amid a grinding war with Ukraine, Moscow's aim is to showcase that Western efforts to isolate Russia have failed. Megumi Lim has more from Kyiv.
Well, the summit is no doubt an important one for Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's hoping to showcase his clout in the non-Western world and to convince BRICS countries to adopt an alternative to the US dollar for global payments to create a shield against Western sanctions. Russia's finance ministry has already proposed a new payment system based on a network of commercial banks linked through the BRICS central banks. The BRICS group has been perceived as a counterweight to the Western-led world and make up 45% of the global population and 28% of the global economy. In Kyiv, Megumi Lim, Salem News Channel.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel for his 11th visit to the region since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. He'll meet with top officials as the United States looks to continue ceasefire talks after the killing of top Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is telling world financial leaders that the U.S. economy has grown stronger because the Biden administration rejected isolationism. Yellen opened the IMF and World Bank annual meetings today by highlighting U.S. economic growth since the nation was in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. Without mentioning Trump by name, she said the Biden administration ended a period of international isolationism that made America and the world worse off. Now let's check out today's closing bell numbers. And that's what you need to know at this hour. In New York, I'm Haley Bianco, Salem News Channel.